Idolatry is the simulation of God, a simulation of a deity. Idolatry is the marginalization of omnipotence. In other words, making something that's all-powerful, bringing it into an earthly form. Idolatry is the humanizing of the transcendent. It is the exchange of Creator, trading in the Creator of the universe for creation. In other words, worshiping creation before the Creator. Idolatry is also the appropriation of the Creator and Provider into a self-serving earthly concept. Let's talk about for a minute the Enlightenment. The Age of Reason, which peaked in the 1700s, was a period of great philosophical, scientific, and social advancement, marked specifically by an event called the French Revolution. Now, much good obviously came out of this period, a lot of growth. However, concurrent to this movement came the modern form of idolatry so popular today. In other words, reason was enshrined as a deity. You can see that in art of the day, where reason was made into a goddess and crowned as the new deity, a new goddess called reason. This is what the Statue of Liberty represents. Columbia, these feminine goddess idols that we see all around the world that came out of that period, they represent the age of reason. This was about exalting human potential over God's omnipotent light. In fact, human potential overshadowed God's omnipotent light. Humanism exploded in this period. Not necessarily an organic movement either. I don't want to assume that this was the mass, the working people, rising up and causing this movement. Not necessarily the case, as it's sometimes assumed. Typically, whenever one power is moved out and another power moves in, it's just a different faction of the establishment moving out the other faction of the establishment. And with it, they brought in this new idea of reason. And they, quote-unquote, killed God. That's kind of what's said about them at that time. It was the death of God. This establishment sought to kill God, to replace God with a hyper-real creation. That's the kind of idolatry that we're talking about here. A type of idolatry that has no reference to any reality. It's the pure construction of man's mind. So they replaced God with a hyper-real creation, a more malleable representation that could be molded for man's use. A new deity that all could easily accept. In fact, the establishment created a new deity that none could refuse. It is known as today still the state. Out of this movement also came the new idea of humanism, where God, the Creator, is objective, the idol is subjective. This new form of humanism, where the intellect, the human potential, man's ability to reason becomes the deity, becomes idolized. But that can only be subjective. New rituals of relativism caused man to trade his connection to objective morality, or God, for a new man-made morality that is always in flux, easily manipulated by that establishment, by that state and its quote-unquote leaders. Quote from Horace Greeley. Horace Greeley said, "It is impossible to mentally or socially enslave a Bible-reading people. The principles of the Bible are the groundwork of human freedom." The principles of the Bible are the groundwork of human freedom. What does he mean by that? We're not talking about Kenneth Copeland's form of Bible reading, or Joel Osteen's, Joyce Meyer's form of Bible reading, Benny Hinn. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the type of Christians that you never hear on. You never hear from them because they're not busy with those kinds of things. In fact, all through history, those who followed the Bible, kept it as their foundation, as their lens for the world, were folks that were rarely ever heard from. It's impossible to mentally or socially enslave a Bible-reading people. The principles of the Bible are the groundwork of human freedom. Now that goes contrary to what the new atheist movement will tell you. That's what I'm here to deal with tonight, as to why that might be. One outcome of about 300 years of this so-called age of reason has been a shift to secularism, a society that claims to be irreligious, recognizing no religions or no religious systems as authoritative. Now, the purpose of this idea was to avoid theocracy and to exalt liberty and freedom. In other words, the ability for one to choose his own lifestyle, to choose his own religion. This is generally a good thing. This is the right idea for a leadership. This was the original intention of these United States of America. However, when there is a power vacuum, there's always another power ready to slip in and fill the void, scoop away mud out of a puddle quickly. goes right back up. So this so-called age of reason, instead of keeping religion at bay, has actually created the perfect conditions for a dangerous form of a new religion called relativism, where objective morality and truth have been simulated, and over time, the original has been obscured. Not lost, but definitely obscured. The result today, we see a type of skepticism that is dangerous and destructive. A type of skepticism that poses as a method of epistemology. And this world is just deception after deception. So a strong skepticism is healthy. You have to always test the claims and perspectives that are offered to you. But when skepticism is used as a method to disallow evidence and arguments of a competing worldview, that sort of skepticism, that type of mindset degenerates into denial. That type of skepticism degenerates into denial. Now, it's understandable given the amount of deception present in our society today, because it's difficult to know what's real, but we have to be careful that we don't let the skepticism become the idol. We can't let a methodology become our idol. We can't let our own intellect become our idol. That's dangerous. This is where this new atheism enters the story. This is a movement that is a form of idolatry, a relative, subjective construction of a simulation that most comfortably fits one's own perspective. In other words, it's the creation of an idol that fits one's own perspective, which must be, by definition, relative, subjective, also known as convenience. The love of convenience will be the death of liberty in our world if we don't watch it. Convenience is what is sold today. It's everywhere. And convenience is a good thing. Just like skepticism, just like healthy skepticism, convenience is a good and helpful thing. But be careful that convenience doesn't become your idol. Otherwise, you'll give up all your freedom for convenience and security. And remember, the most secure individuals on the planet, people who have all their needs met for them every day, are prisoners. People who live within prisons have the most convenient lifestyle you can imagine. Now, here's an interesting point to make. Christian theists are actually more at liberty to follow the evidence where it leads than those who would rule out the supernatural or transcendence. This new atheist movement believes there is no God. This atheist movement says that it is irrational to believe without evidence. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So by his own narrow definition of faith, he believes without evidence. Therefore, atheism is irrational. And as I've said already, it is a form of idolatry. The idol is a methodology that is called skepticism. In fact, it is a simulated epistemology. You hear this type of mindset, and the primary move that Matt Dillahunty uses is to call everything that's offered a claim, and then to say there's no evidence for the claim. This is a dishonest approach. This is not epistemology. This is idolizing skepticism, taking it to a level where it's not healthy at all. It's not useful. You can't get to truth that way. You can only stay in your own bubble, your own sheltered worldview. You're not scientific if you reject all claims that have to do with the existence of God. This form of skepticism is an untenable worldview due to its own built-in denial of all possibilities. It is, in fact, anti-science. The supernatural is self-evident. This so-called new atheism is a religious belief system. It has its own dogmas, its own denominations. As a subset of humanism, which is the rejection of the supernatural and the rejection of objective morality of God, this mindset is left open to dangerous moral blind spots. For example, a moral blind spot such as, we're more evolved today. We're more evolved socially than the people of the past. And I would say technologically, yes. But socially and spiritually, no way. No. We have not grown or evolved socially or spiritually. We are quantifiably and qualitatively far more barbaric today than any collection of societies from antiquity. Why do I say that? Well, one of the common objections to Christianity is slavery. The Bible promotes slavery. Well, you got to understand what slavery means in the Old Testament. For the most part, we're talking about a type of servitude where, let's say, just for example, a woman's husband and children are killed in a battle. She's left alone. She goes to live with a family. This was a Hebrew tradition. Remember, the Old Testament is a Hebrew book. So what they're calling slavery in the Old Testament is not the idea of slavery that we have in our heads, this 18th, 19th, 20th, and still today version of slavery that we see in our world. No, we're far more barbaric today than in the past. The biblical form of quote-unquote slavery slavery is where this woman, maybe the woman would live with the family and serve the family, work in the field. She would be able to glean from the field. She could work for the family in some capacity, and in return, she would have a place to live. She would be safe, protected, and she would be allowed to work her way into being able to take care of herself again. That is the kind of slavery that is mostly spoken of in the Bible. Now, the other type of slavery from that day would be the type of slavery that the Roman Empire used and promoted. It's a little misguided to say the Bible promotes slavery and then thinking about this idea of slave ships. It's not the same thing. How could you put your faith in a God who promotes genocide? Well, usually what's been spoken of when people mention genocide are the Canaanites were destroyed. God destroyed this people group. But what had these people done for years and years? They sacrificed their children. They had abhorrent practices. They had a religion that was truly scary. Child sacrifice was a regular part of that religion. And through the prophets of the day, these people were warned. For years and years, they were warned. But they kept up their practice. For instance, when I say child sacrifice, I mean they would heat up the hands of their idol. For instance, one of the idols would be, for one of the people groups was Moloch. They put a fire under the hands of this idol, and then they would throw their babies into those red or white hot hands. The baby would be burned alive, and to mask the screams of the child, people in the ritual would play loud music and sing loudly so that you couldn't hear the child screaming. Because if anyone showed emotion, if the parents showed emotion for the child that was being sacrificed, the sacrifice was invalidated and they had to do it all over again. And this was a regular occurrence. Sounds very barbaric, right? They were so barbaric that God destroyed them. Now, what about us today? Certainly, we don't do that, right? We don't throw our babies into fires today and sacrifice them to stone gods that can't speak or breathe at all. No, today, we passively allow approximately nearly 700,000 children every year to be aborted before they even have a chance to be born and come into the world. And isn't that ironic that the very first sacred right mentioned in our Declaration of Independence is life here in this country? Nearly 700,000 children a year are destroyed before they have a chance to be born. Folks, that is nearly 200 per 1,000 live births. In some reporting years, that means as much as 20%, sometimes more, but on average, about 20% of all reported pregnancies are aborted. We're far more barbaric. You might say we're not barbaric because we do it in the privacy of a medical procedure where it's very sanitary. We're not evolving, my friends. Our society is degenerate. We need a savior, and it's not going to be one of us. Okay, so having set that up, now let's get into this moral argument. Now we begin the presentation of this case for God's existence. The pure apologetic intended to strengthen the faith of believers who may have never known that God's character can be defended. God's existence. No one piece of evidence will ever be enough to convince any of these denying skeptics. Therefore, we build the full case. So let's get started. Where do our values come from? Where does our morality actually come from? How do we determine what is moral? If morals are products of evolution, why don't we share the same with the animals? Why don't we share the same approach to morals that the animals do? If we share common ancestors and one objective moral mind, one objective moral consciousness that never changes is required for consistency. That rules out all of mankind that ever was or ever will be. This moral order that we talk about is as ubiquitous throughout the planet, throughout our world, as the natural order is. The moral order, what we think is right and wrong, good and evil, is as common to our perception in the world as the natural order of things is. In other words, we can tell what is good and evil as easily as we can obey the law of gravity. Our inborn morals are experienced the same way we experience the natural laws of the universe. Why? Why is that? Why are these morals so automatic in our mind? How has this happened? Can't really appeal to evolution, because if we've been here the same amount of time as the animals, one can parse this out using arguments for natural selection or some other natural consequence. However, it fails when one tries to reconcile the separation in consciousness between man and the animal. morals. My friends, the best explanation for why we have any morals at all is God. What is God? God is eternal. He is uncaused, immaterial. As the Bible says, God is a spirit. God is transcendent. That means He's outside nature. He's outside of our immediate reality, but He can interact with it at His will. God is personal, which means He has a personality. God is a mind, a consciousness, and a cause. And as we'll find out, the more we move on with the cosmological argument, God is necessary. He is not contingent. He is the first cause, the eternal cause. He has no cause. We'll make that argument later. I've had it asked me before, define what is this God you're speaking about? Because I think people assume that what we're talking about is a man in the sky. We're talking about omniscience, omnipotence, all-powerful, omnipresent. We're talking about something that's difficult for our mind to conceive of because it existed before time, space, matter. In fact, existence is absurd without such a being. Without God, all is relative, and relativism is unsustainable. There is such a thing as right and wrong, good and evil, and truth. Here's the simple argument for God's existence. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Objective moral values and duties do exist, therefore God exists. Now let's talk about those premises, but first let's do some definitions. What are moral values? Moral values are the worth of a person or an action. In other words, moral values are whether or not something is good or bad. Moral duties is an obligation to act in a certain way, whether that action is right or wrong. So we have moral values and moral duties. Objective means independent of opinions, like laws of nature. Laws of nature operate regardless of what your opinion is. So does morality. That's the argument. Subjective means dependent upon opinions. In other words, subjective is our preference, just our preference. Now, objective moral values are good or bad regardless of what people think. Objective moral duties are right or wrong regardless of what people think. For example, let's think about terrorism because we're made to think about it so much today. To walk into a mall or a crowded market with a bomb strapped to your chest and to kill 30, 50 or more innocent people is wrong. Even though the one carrying out the act believes it's right. Even though the entire sect of people supporting him think it's right, it is wrong. Objective morality doesn't care what our opinions or beliefs are. We instinctively know that is wrong. That is evil. Objective moral duties require God. The most popular form of atheism is naturalism, which holds that which can be measured by the scientific method are the only things that exist. So if you can't put it in a beaker, it ain't real. Now, science is morally neutral. Science doesn't care about what is right or wrong or good or evil. Science is just observation and measurement. According to science, moral values do not exist. In other words, morality must all be a product of natural selection. In other words, we behave the same as herds. That would be the naturalist approach to why we have any morals at all. It doesn't make much sense, does it? Because once again, why are we different from the animal? Why do we know the difference between good and evil? And why don't we hold them to the same standard? If we are all the same, if we are evolved from those animals, what basis is there for objective moral duties? On the naturalist, atheist viewpoint, we are simply animals with no moral obligation to one another at all. If there is no objective, moral giver of laws existing above, beyond man, and outside of creation, the cause of the creation, then there is no objective law. Here's a thought experiment to help you with that. Try to imagine creating an argument for why it is morally wrong for a man to rape a woman, but it is not morally wrong for a chimpanzee to forcibly copulate with another chimpanzee. Try to imagine why those two things are different without God. The point here is not that belief in God is necessary for objective morality, but in fact that God is necessary. God's existence is necessary for us to have objective morality. Certainly atheists and agnostics, people of all faiths, can live perfectly moral lives. Non-believers who respect human life can obviously construct reasonable systems of law. The point is, there is no objective morality. None would exist without the lawgiver, without God. And that God is necessary, required for any objective morality to exist. Without God, the objective morality. Without God, who is the objective morality, good and bad, right and wrong, is an abstract concept that differs from person to person. Humanism is arbitrary and thus untenable. In fact, for man to look upon himself as his own savior, which is humanism, is the most implausible worldview imaginable. That's what humanism is. A humanist sees himself as his savior. Why is it implausible? Why is it untenable as a worldview? Because man is variable. Man chooses variability. He can do no other. As it says in James chapter 1, verse 8, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. And double-mindedness is our natural condition. Let's talk about experience. This new form of atheism is not actually new at all. Today, it's just misguided in its exaltation of man's senses, in the worship, if you will, of reason, the worship of methodology, epistemology. The skeptic who claims that his five senses are infallible, or that his five senses are an infallible epistemological methodology, has deceived us. Human beings are extremely limited in our ability to perceive our universe, as tiny and isolated as we seem to be on this planet, with such a severely limited ability to perceive even the electromagnetic spectrum, for example. To claim to have an infallible epistemology is simply folly. To claim there is no evidence for God is also folly. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Atheism is well supplied with fallacies and assumptions. The question comes up, why would a good God allow people to harm each other? A loving God creates a world in which love is possible. True love requires humans to have the ability to freely choose. Love cannot be forced if it is to be heartfelt and real. A world in which people have the freedom to choose who they will serve, even if they want to serve themselves, is a world where great acts of kindness are possible. But in a world where great acts of kindness are also possible, evil is also possible, because man has been given the ability to choose who he will serve. Otherwise, I hear the argument, why doesn't God change it all? Well, then we would be robotic. Then we would be God's little robots. That's not how sin and death is defeated with robots. It's defeated with love and obedience to God, to the objective moral lawgiver. Because we have the ability to choose, love is possible. And we don't mean love as a sickly sentimentalism like we define in our own hearts. We can't produce love. We're incapable of producing love. Look around you. Look at the divorce rate, for example. Love is a gift from God that we're able to share with one another. Why would a good God allow earthquakes, tsunamis, and disease? You have to also remember, do we have any evidence to God doesn't have a sufficient reason for allowing these things to happen? Why should we think that in our very short experience that we shouldn't be subject to some kind of suffering? See, that's solipsism. When you believe that your perspective is the only one that matters, and that there should be no suffering in your life. And if it happens, it's unfair. It says some natural evil may be the result of necessity. We see a very tiny fragment of the timeline in our lives. God may tolerate some natural evil because it is a necessary consequence of a free natural process making it possible for free will creatures to thrive. God may also tolerate some natural evil because it is the necessary consequence of human free agency. Humans often rebuild after earthquakes and rebuild after hurricanes. There are times when natural evil is either caused or aggravated even by free human choices. In addition, we can say that God may permit some natural evil because it challenges people to think about Him maybe for the first time. Maybe that's how He chose to present Himself. Who are we to judge an authority that could create the universe? Finally, God may permit some natural evil because it provides humans with some sort of motivation, an opportunity to develop more character. Because look around, we lack character. We lack good character. It's at a premium today. A world like ours requires human beings to cooperate, to peacefully coexist in order to successfully respond to challenges. Okay, how about theistic evil? Why would a good God behave so badly in the Old Testament? God is, let's say, the greatest artist. All art belongs to the artist, to the artisan. He has the right to create and destroy whatever he likes. Even when this destruction may seem unfair to you or me, it's His painting. God is also the greatest physician. Treatment plans belong to the doctor, to the one who gave you your life. God has the wisdom and authority to treat us as He sees fit. Even when we might not be able to understand the overarching danger we face, drastic action isn't taken. Finally, God is the Savior. The Christian worldview describes human existence as eternal in the condition of salvation. If there is a God, He is certainly more concerned about our eternal existence than He is about our current level of comfort or more concerned about saving us for eternity than he is about making our mortal lives safe. The purpose of life on the planet is not necessarily happiness. Regardless of worldview, humans will try to find a way to justify their evil actions. The question is not which group is more violent, but which worldview most authorizes and accommodates this violence. Christians who commit horrific evil toward other humans actually are acting in opposition to the teaching of their master, Jesus Christ. Therefore, to blame Christianity on bad behavior is ridiculous. This is not about you must believe in God to be able to know what is good and evil. That's not the case. The point is, because God exists, we know the difference between good and evil. We have objective morality because God exists. Unlike Christians, atheists can commit genocide without ignoring their worldview. Atheists have the freedom to eliminate competing groups as a faithful expression of their worldview too. So it doesn't make any sense to say that it's religion's fault that there's evil in the world or that there's wars in the world. We're all equally pathetic. We're fallen. We're not good. Not even one of us. Romans chapter 3 teaches us that clearly. Not even one of us is good. That's the Christian worldview.